welcome to Not Controversial. I'm your host, Darwin Salazar, and this is where we have conversations that no one asked for, but that everyone wants to hear. Thank you for listening to today's first episode, Inside the Democratic Divide. So, before we begin, I want to note that all statements and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely my own and are offered in my individual capacity. Nothing should be construed as representing or reflecting the official views or positions of any organization which I am affiliated in, including my role as a school board student representative, president of Latinos for Latinos, and or president of the Virginia School Board Student Representatives Association. With that out of the way, let's get into today's discussion and welcome today's guest. Hello.
Hello. Good to be here with you, Darren.
Great, thank you. Everyone, this is Mr. Alex Perez-Reyes, and he is the president of Alexandria's Young Democrats charter. So, before we dive in, can you just tell the listeners uh, who you are, how you became the president of this charter, and what is Young Democrats?
Sure thing. So again, my name is Alex Perez-Reyes. I'm president of the Alexandria Young Democrats, and my journey really began when I moved to Alexandria 3 years ago. I wanted to get more involved in local democratic politics, and it truly is astounding how you can become engaged just by showing up. So it started off getting involved with the Alexandria Democratic Committee, the city's Democratic Party, and then getting involved with the Young Democrats, a specific age-based part of the party. So we accept everyone from ages 13 to 35, so a
Mm-hmm.
pretty broad range, including some folks here at the school. Um, but since that time, I've risen the ranks from political director to vice president, now president, and we just had an incredible election season, campaigning across the Commonwealth, supporting candidates from the top of the ballot all the way down through House of Delegates races, and winning pretty mightily.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, do you guys get a lot of teenagers?
We have a few. In fact, we've got members in the middle schools, high schools, as well as local colleges, and up until later ages in 30s. So,
Yeah, that's amazing. Look, for everyone listening, I only found out about the Young Democrats during the summer. And I didn't know until I met, Caesar, who is a local advocate who I love, and he's now a teacher at DC, and he told me about the Young Democrats and that you guys were campaigning for, canvassing for Abigail Spanberger. I was like, I'd love that experience. So let me go try it, let me go do it, and I loved it. It was amazing. Of course, you have your bad experiences here and there with canvassing. There are some people that don't like to be knocked, their doors to be knocked on. But other than
hmm
that, it was just amazing, and the energy that was brought in by the people who were hosting the sites, it was incredible. But yes, you're absolutely right. We Democrats actually dominated November 4th. So I guess that brings me into one of my very first questions because, as you know, directly after I wrote an opinion piece on theogony
hmm
about the different campaigns. For example, here in our own state, Virginia, we had our gubernatorial race with Abigail Spanberger, who ran a very heavy campaign on pragmatism, and who very openly took shots at Mamdani and his socialist views. But in New York City, it was very different. Mamdani's idealism and his youthful energy was able to beat Cuomo. So I guess my first question is: do you believe that there is a divide happening within the Democratic Party between the voters, or is it exaggerated by the media to harm the party's image?
um, I would say that there's more a division over how to pursue our common goals than necessarily a division over how what we are seeking to achieve. So in terms of what I mean by that, I think that it's much more a matter of style and communication rather than the overall goals themselves. If you look at common messages, the issues of affordability, I mean, so many Americans right now are saying that how they're going to make ends meet is their number one issue. And I definitely can imagine that the other party wants us not talking about that
Oh,
because, especially issues with healthcare premiums coming up the next year, that's a huge issue that they're just not talking about. So, in terms of within the Democratic divide, I do think that in certain cases it's going to be more useful for certain candidates to distance themselves from certain ideas. And I mean, I think the one thing I truly think about that is I would hope that all Democrats could support whoever wins the Democratic nomination. I was thinking back to 2016 when I was, reading your essay, remembering how there was a lot of pressure on Bernie Sanders to very publicly support Hillary Clinton in 2016, and I would hope for the same amount of courtesy across the board, be it for a progressive candidate in New York or a moderate candidate in Virginia. Democrats should be supporting Democrats because the alternative is so much worse.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great response because, but here's the one thing I do see. I know you know Rogue DNC, the Rogue Democrat Instagram page. They post a lot about hating establishment Dems and especially the corporate money that they take and the APAC money. So when you said, I hope that Democrats support the Democratic nominee, that brings me to Hakeem Jeffries. So how do you feel about that? Do you feel that are the House Minority Leader should step up and actually start distance himself from corporate money, or do you think because that's really one of the huge divides between these people?
I mean, I think that's definitely a question that smarter minds than I have been considering in the House Democratic Campaign Committee. In certain cases, the candidates may not want or need the minority leader's support. There's a lot of times when, in fact, running against a establishment figure has helped candidates burnish their independent credentials. I'm old enough to remember when the go-to question was, "Would you support Harry Reid for Senate leader, let alone Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi nowadays?" I think in terms of what the party needs from leadership, it's bold vision, and I think we saw a bit of that with the shutdown fight, trying to raise this issue of healthcare premiums, and I think we did successfully get that to be on everyone's agenda. No one was going to be talking about that issue before the shutdown, and now it's front and center. We're trying to get something done on that, which, as minority party, I think is frankly something we should be recognizing is exceptional. So I think in terms of that kind of vision, that's the kind of thing we can realistically achieve as the minority. Beyond that, uh, just making sure that come next November, we're no longer in the minority. That's, I think, goal number one
Yeah.
for any minority
Yeah,
leader at any time.
midterms are next year, so everyone who is old enough to vote should be able to now. So okay, so you're basically saying, it's not the campaign style, it's not pragmatism, it's not idealism, it's sort of are you focused on the goals that people are you focused on the problems that Americans are suffering through right now?
Yes, and a little bit. I think that there's different ways of reaching different audiences, and I think that both have a certain potential. The idealistic vision of Mamdani really speaks to those who are more disaffected, disillusioned with the way things are just kind of going the status quo. And there's a lot of people, on the other hand, who do want a calm, reassuring approach. Because, frankly, the amount of chaos in people's lives from especially federal workforce perspectives, having someone there who will say, "We have a plan," is in fact pretty reassuring. So I think it really, the best approach would marry the two.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly what my article said. So I love that you agree with that. Do you currently see that divide here locally in Alexandria? I mean, we're very blue, but do you hear about, oh, I wish that Spamberger had the energy Mamdani had? Or did you hear, I wish that the growing number of idealists would stop and we would keep, being more liberal? What do you hear that here locally in Alexandria?
I'd say what I hear a lot of is, desire for responsive government across the board. And I say this in the most small d democratic sense, that people want government that represents them, their interests, and their perspectives. And so this is everything from, local elected offices all the way up to, federal offices. We just recently had Senator Warner announce his reelection campaign, and so you look at things. Especially, I'm always interested in primaries because that's where ideas come out to the fore, and the party can really debate. And we do see a number of candidates already on our local congressional level who have filed despite the incumbent running again. And I think that says a little bit of there's demand for dialogue about the key issues that people are facing and hopefulness for responsiveness. We want to see
Absolutely.
our local electeds truly listening, engaging, and frankly, winning by listening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm so happy you brought up the congressman who, is the incumbent congressman right now, and the fact that there are so many other candidates. Well, from what I know, at least two, two or three who are just running now. And you're absolutely right because Alexandria, especially Northern Virginia, is very blue. To the point, a lot of Republicans and conservatives don't put a lot of money into their campaigns, and a lot. What I've been hearing a lot here is that people are just very upset at the fact they don't have options.
Mhm.
And I'm so happy. You know, you just gave me a new insight into it because exactly the fact that people are running, there are more people who are willing to step up and just say, you know, like I think that actually we should challenge the incumbent congressman is, you know, just something that it's really refreshing to hear, especially in the current times where we know that there are people actually are starting to care a little bit more. But you also mentioned the senator. And now that brings me on, and you also mentioned Chuck Schumer. So my question is, how did you feel during the government shutdown? How did you feel that the fact that the majority of Democrats think that uh, the senators gave up, especially Senator Tim Kaine gave up, and they lost their chance at actually fighting for better an extension for the healthcare premium?
I think this takes, this is a very thorny question. And one thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that in terms of concessions that government shutdowns have ever been able to achieve, at least in my political awareness, I've been around for most of the longest ones at this point. Very rarely have I seen a minority party extract major concessions from this process. And so I think going into it, there was perhaps an a problem of overpromising what could be achieved from this process. There also, I think, was some unexpected uh, challenges when it came to figuring this out in terms of having willing partners, especially from the White House engaging in this. Typically, you would see some level of engagement to broker funding deals, and we had none of that from this administration because, frankly, they probably were perfectly fine
Yeah.
with government workers suffering. I mean, they've publicly declared they want to terrorize the federal workforce. So I think there are a number of circumstances that made it such that going in, we probably wouldn't have gotten as much as we were publicly declaring we were aiming for. Um, that I think is the key kind of reason why a lot of folks are left wondering what it was all for. If we went out there and just said we want to raise the issue of health care premiums, that's not exactly the most inspiring rallying cry. It may have been the more realistic one, but I think unfortunately by raising those expectations, we've now kind of repped a little bit what we sowed on that front.
Are you disappointed in Senator Tim Kaine for voting the way he did?
I wouldn't say that I'm personally disappointed. I think it at the end of the day was probably the most realistic vote that one could take there. Um, do I wish that we could have achieved something more from that? Yes. Do I also think that perhaps in retrospect the shutdown wasn't worth it?
Mm-hmm.
I also kind of have doubts about that. So I would put trust in Senator Kaine. I've campaigned for him since his first run for Senate in 2012. Always thought that he was a very thoughtful senator. And one thing I'd also say is that it's not as if these folks that we've known for 20 some years at this point in Virginia have somehow changed their stripes overnight. Um, he is still a good Democratic senator.
Yeah.
The one thing that, just as a point of contrast, that I would say, a little bit on, I would hope that we could have a little bit firmer opposition to administrative nominees on both of our senators' sides.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that the local committee has passed resolutions on asking the senators not to, support any administration nominees, and that hasn't exactly been what they've chosen to vote on. So that is one thing that I do kind of
Yeah.
question,
Yeah.
personally speaking.
Yeah, no, Democrats always get backlash on things like that. I guess one of my biggest questions is, do you believe that when you saw that tear apart from what Chuck Schumer was saying publicly, do you think Chuck Schumer has a hard time getting senators in line? As in, like, do you think that a lot of Democrats were telling him, it's your fault that the senators voted the way they did. Why didn't you keep your party in line? And just now we have 14 Congress members have asked for his resignation and asking him to step down as party leader. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think personally, if you're going to be the minority leader and you allow a certain portion of your caucus to vote a certain way, I my personal take is I don't understand why he wouldn't have voted alongside those 9 or 8 senators I think it was in that vote, because at this point either he is in charge of his caucus or he isn't. But it's fashionable again to criticize the person who has to be in charge. I'm not
Oh,
going to
absolutely.
try an armchair quarterback, but it I would say it confuses me. I don't see what rationale they could have for something like that. In that kind of instance, at the very least, being clear that you're fine with the government being reopened, even if you're trying to save, I don't know, maybe potential political capital with people who are angry the time before.
Yeah.
Um, but again, the number of Democrats criticizing Chuck Schumer is only eclipsed by the number of Republicans criticizing Chuck Schumer.
No,
So,
exactly.
um,
So I mean, so a recurring theme I keep hearing is that Democrats have continue to have that messaging problem. Continue to be, they're having that problem where they continuously have, just can't get their message across to people. And when they do get their message across, they seem to overpromise, and that's when they get their backlash. Am I getting that correctly?
I think so. I mean, one issue with any political promise, especially nowadays, is the ability to deliver. Um, we exist, at least on the federal level, with a very gridlocked system.
Mm-hmm.
And so, at least on that level, the realistic nature of a lot of these promises is we will do our best. And unfortunately, with the, as we've kind of seen, our ability to extract concessions on the federal level is incredibly limited. No one wants to say that
Yeah.
because, again, that's terrible messaging, but it is unfortunately the reality of minority party politics, which is one reason why, just looking back most recently, those 2025 elections were so much more uh, compelling candidacies
Mm-hmm.
to run on. State politics, things can still happen, ideas can be big, and things can be done, especially when you have a new governing trifecta. So that kind of compare contrast approach, local politics this year had so much more to offer in terms of things that we could say we can, in fact, pass these kind of priorities on the local level because um, we had the power.
Yeah. That I love that because it just a lot of people don't acknowledge it. A lot of Democrats don't acknowledge it. Yes, our power is limited. Yes, we can't really do much, but I feel like it hurts people more to give them hope and then and then lose it.
Yeah, I mean, especially just in the sense that you're facing such a problem of trust in politics right now,
Mm-hmm.
and to overpromise and underdeliver is the worst thing you can
Absolutely.
do. Um,
Going on to another section, because throughout the day I've been asking people what their biggest question and what they really want to know from this, and we have actually student questions at the end.
hmm?
But one I kept getting one that was that I made it my own section. I made it a section in and of itself. The growing number of leftists. We have a lot of socialists. We have, the Democratic Socialists of America are just they just got even bigger with Zoran Mamdani's win. We have Alexandria Cortez, who's actually planning to run against Chuck Schumer. We have Bernie Sanders, who was again he was always a socialist back then, but now he's getting even more popular. So I just wonder where you think the Democratic, where, if you think if the Democratic Party is going to is going to continue to lean left, where we're going to go with that. How do we handle liberal versus leftist mindset? How do we do that, especially at the local level and international level?
So in terms of how we manage that, I mean, I also want to point out a little bit, just historically speaking. You go back even to President Obama's first term, and the ideological range of the Democratic Party was so much broader. The Blue Dog Caucus was a force to be reckoned with.
Mm-hmm.
The Affordable Care Act turned the way it was because there was such a diversity within the House caucus, and so even to kind of address that point, as we look now, the average, you know, member of the Democratic Party in Congress is substantially further to the left than they were before, even if they're the same individuals.
Oh.
I still remember the week in which the Senate kind of almost like a domino came out in favor of marriage equality. It was incredibly quick on an issue that had previously been much further to the right than before, and all overnight almost the party moved to the left. The orthodoxy changed. So I think I raise those points because ideas that seem, on the left fringe now, I mean, especially you track the development of ideas like Medicare for all. I want to say I haven't viewed the ad, but I believe Senator Warner's endorsed some version of
Oh.
Medicare for all. I'm this is a little bit hearsay, I secondhand, but just to that point, this is an idea that back in 2016, 2020, during the primaries, was being painted as not feasible. Just the dreams of those like you mentioned, Bernie Sanders. And over time, as the party has come to appreciate the depths of some of these problems, I think these more left solutions are gaining currency. And so my personal hope would be that regardless of whether an idea is coming from leftists, liberals, or more centrist Democrats, it's weighed on the merits, and that is for all of those ideas so that they aren't discounted just because they're being branded as far right radical leftists, whatever the president puts on
Yeah.
truth, weigh them on their merits, not on what the opposing party is going to label them as, because the value of these ideas is becoming clearer and clearer over time. The fact that it's coming from one wing or the other right now shouldn't stop us from taking good hard looks and asking, is this policy actually going to help people? And I think oftentimes, because sometimes it's politically less palatable early on, people shy away from it. And only later, once the groundwork has been done, support's bubbled up, then a little bit more of the movement to that is I'm not going to say fair weather or
Mhm.
kind of weather vane approach to policy, but if we could embrace good ideas earlier in the process, we can really do more good now as opposed to kicking the can down a few years.
Do you think we can do that with the current Democratic incumbents in Congress right now? Or you think that one day they'll come around? Because, I mean, she's not a congresswoman anymore, but Governor-elect Bamberger actually one day in an interview, she said we should never say the word socialism anymore. We should keep that word out. We should never say it. I mean, do you think that these people will change their minds once it becomes more popular later on in the future, or do you think we need to get rid well, not, I don't want to say get rid of because I feel like that's a very harsh word. But do you think that there needs to be a new generation of leaders so that it would be much faster and easier to process?
One thing I would kind of say, as when I went to college, I studied Russian and political science, so I'm
Oh
very
wow.
much aware of what real existing socialism looked like, and I think to a certain extent the reason why a lot of politicians don't want to say that word is just because of negative associations,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to the experiences that some groups of folks in America have had fleeing from socialist regimes and such. I think that the ideas of socialism, leftism should still be weighed accordingly because as we've kind of seen, untrammeled capitalism has
Yeah.
its own vices. I read a funny post on Blue Sky about neoliberalism works once because you're stripping the house and selling it for parts. So maybe perhaps we need a different approach to these solutions. As for the question of if we need, different leaders, I think partially what we need is for good ideas to have support up and down the party structure.
Mm-hmm.
Because when it comes to what our electeds here, the more organized, the more vocal the grassroots are, the clearer it is that this is an issue that even if they aren't necessarily 100% behind it, if there is something like an healthcare policy that truly does help solve the issue, and the grassroots are vocal about it, I do think that regardless of if you're new or old guard, you would follow your voters a little bit more on that, or at least the active weight of the party, whether that's from grassroots up to your local electeds, it kind of all filters up, I think. So the more organized we are on the grassroots level, the louder that signal becomes that this is something that truly does need another look.
I love that response. That's great. That's great. Um, but now let's go even deeper into the question. Do you think we can do that with Democrats who are considered bought and paid for?
Hmm. I mean, I personally would not necessarily go with that kind of characterization. I think one huge issue certainly is big money in politics. And you go back, God, I always feel old when I think about it. Is it 14 years since Citizens United? Maybe 15. Um, the dawn of unlimited political spending in campaigns and the ever increasing amount that it costs to run for office. Um, I think if you take a look at how the fundraising kind of numbers end up working out, I wouldn't necessarily say that any individual donation means that a politician is, quote unquote, bought and paid for. I do worry about transparency, especially when it comes to uh, super PACs, which have even less requirements. Candidates at least have filing reports that we could monitor saying, oh, this is who has given to this candidate. So there's some amount of transparency still left there. But with super PACs, it's completely gone. Um, I do think that when it comes to certain like hot button issues, the presence of political donations does raise a bit of a credibility issue. It makes it harder for us as voters to. I mean, I personally don't know which exact politicians you currently have in mind. Just I don't follow it that closely, but I mean, when it comes to those issues, we really do have to be careful with language, especially when it comes to bought and paid for, just because those accusations of disloyalty can very easily metastasize into something none of us want to be going into. That's partially why I'm, hesitant there. The other thing I think I went to Georgetown University. One of the key ideas that the Jesuit education posits is that you presume best intentions. And I think there are legitimate reasons beyond the financial that people could have the opinions that they're having on any of a variety of hot button issues. And if we start seeing conspiracies behind every action, then to a certain extent we start slipping into the same kind of mind space that the far right has kind of gotten into, and I worry about that.
No, I actually know. I worry about that too. That was a great response. Um, so I guess with all of this going on, with the Democrats' messaging issues, with what you just said, the accusations being thrown around, the fight, the people who are worried about too much liberalism, and then the people who are worried about too much leftism. I guess who do you think would be the perfect nominee for 2023? I mean, you're not going to endorse anyone, but who do you think is rising up the ranks? Because a lot of people are saying Kamala Harris not anymore because of her bridge burning book. And a lot of people are saying Gavin Newsom is the one who's going to be number one. On Politico wrote, I had an article about it. So I guess, do you agree with that? Is Gavin Newsom our next Democratic nominee?
I'm gonna say I'm a little partial here. Before coming to Virginia, I was born outside of Chicago, so my dream draft pick would be Governor Pritzker, I think.
Really?
And it's funny because if you'd asked me 2 years ago, would the Democrats' answer be a rather rich individual, I would have had a little bit of difficulty believing that I'd say that. The reason why I'm impressed with his work so far is just his ability to stand firm against the Trump administration, really kind of stand up for Chicago as it's been facing these challenges from ICE. And I think that he has a certain approach that's very no nonsense that I think would speak to a lot of folks. One thing that I kind of wish that I could disagree even stronger with is this notion that some of the party have started talking about of America's just not ready for a female president.
Mm-hmm.
And I I hesitate to allow our ambitions to be limited by the world that we are currently living in rather than seeking to change it. Because the
Absolutely.
moment the Democratic Party abandons the idea that we can and should have a female president is uh, a dark day indeed. So that's an issue that I very strongly would disagree with some in the party on. Is America currently ready? Perhaps not, but I think that's why we have campaigns.
Absolutely. And that's why I was a little upset when I read Kamala Harris's book and where she talked about Biden's former transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg, and she said, I wanted to pick him. He was my first choice to be VP, but I was already asking too much of America. I I didn't want to overstep that line, so that's why I didn't go with him. And I was so mad because exactly you're right. Instead of saying being limited by what we think Americans want, we should be out there campaigning. And you're right. And if it's not what Americans want right now, or if not what the country's okay with right now, at least we set a precedent for the next person.
Yeah. And actually, to that point, I think that's a little bit of what underpins the divide between the pragmatists and the more visionary politicians right
Mm.
now, is a willingness to push the boundaries forward. I think oftentimes when we talk about pragmatism, we're trying to appeal to people where they are currently at, rather than trying to raise the bar
Mm.
to bring about a new vision. And that's why I think you go back, at least the kind of modern era of democratic politics, visions like President Obama's, campaigns like Bernie Sanders that premise themselves on, you know, big
Absolutely.
ideas, trying to change things, speak to people so much because, funnily enough, just because that's where people are currently at doesn't necessarily mean it's where they want to be at in terms of political solutions. In fact, arguably, the system is working so poorly for many that, keeping with this notion of where people are currently most comfortable, it's kind of like saying I'm most comfortable with my terrible couch at home. I've been
Mm.
meaning to replace it, but I just don't know how. We
Mm.
need candidates who will say this is not just a plan, but the reason why that you deserve and can have this better version of an American future.
You're right, and that goes back into my article and what you were saying at the beginning. They needed a mix. You need to reach people where they're at while giving them that hope of like, hey, if we start here, we can. This is where we can end up. So I absolutely agree with that. And we're gonna start going into the student questions
Mm-hmm.
because I know that some people had, and these might be related to the topic, might not be related to the topic. Just give us the best, whatever you think that is right. So at heartsforme._1 said, I know some people who didn't vote for Kamala because they said that she was a bad candidate, even though they are Democrats. Can you compare and contrast Trump and Kamala's policies and the bad and the good news that have surrounded them in the past as well?
So I'm going to continue to appeal to my older history card here and say I think a lot of criticism for Vice President Harris focused on ideas that started coming out back in the 2020 primary, accusations that it was unclear what she truly stood for, these issues around authenticity that I think reemerged in the 2024 short campaign, if you will call it that. Um, I would definitely say that on the one hand, those aren't concerns that I necessarily would have seen lobbed at other candidates within both the Democratic primary or on the Republican side. The GOP famously in 2016 discarded the entire notion of a party platform on policies and just said whatever the president says or whatever at that point candidate Trump would say. So that's a little bit of the old history on that kind of beef. But in terms of discrete policies, I mean, just look at so many of the issues, especially in terms of economics. Kamala Harris was emphasizing real affordability plans,
Mm-hmm.
things that would have put money in the hands of people who needed it most, not the billionaires and
Yep.
at this point half trillionaires.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And so on that front, you've had regressive economic policies from this president that we could have had real attempts at progressive economic policies with Vice President Harris's campaign plan. The other thing about that, of course, is it was abundantly clear during the campaign that now President Trump was intent on resurrecting the tariff wars.
Mm-hmm.
And, the fundamental truth is that those are essentially just regressive taxes on people who need to buy goods. So at this point, people are seeing this crisis in affordability and an additional policy change. The reason why healthcare premiums are becoming a problem now is because before the end of his term, President Biden thankfully extended the subsidies to the Obamacare markets, and this president is not interested in making healthcare affordable. So I can bet you with a President Harris right now, we would not be facing. I can't even remember what the numbers are. 7 times greater healthcare premiums for those on the markets. It's terrible, and this is a relevant issue for youth as well because while you can stay on parents' plans until 26, if your parents don't have a healthcare plan, you do face those mandates. So having healthcare is essential for anyone of any age. Let no one think that they're above that. Take that from this 30-year-old young Democrat. Um, so, I mean, that's just a couple of the ways that we would have seen a different world, I think, with Vice President Harris.
Absolutely. And you already kind of answered this one, but if there's anything you want to add on, let us know. So, at June report says, why are both parties so afraid of socialism when it's shown to be popular? And I think you said the idea of socialism is popular and should be considered, but socialism carries a bad, tone with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, if you took the ideas and never used the word socialism, a lot of Democrats would probably, if you polled them online about, this policy specifically, or even just talk to a legislator about this policy specifically, they might be inclined to say, "Oh yeah, of course I support that." And if you then said, "Oh, that is a central tenet of, a socialist ideology," then it would all of a sudden start becoming a third rail. And so I think to that extent, uh, the word has become a little bit of a boogeyman, and unfortunately, we've allowed that kind of assassination from the right to lead to us abandoning the ideas that the ideology has to offer. I mean, I often point out that in the lack of an international opposition like the Soviet Union, the United States kind of got to rest on its laurels and never explore how to become a better version of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're just using that ghost of socialism because, frankly, I would hesitate to call most of the authoritarian regimes that are claiming that mantle truly socialist. Um, Now we're just using that to make these ideas toxic. And instead of pushing ourselves forward, we're just treading water.
Thank you. They're gonna love that response. The last question is from Gamer 3677 YT. What prompted you to do this specifically? What prompted you to get involved in politics, to become the president of the Young Democrats Association? What prompted you to do all this?
Honestly, I think it was the sense of community and the involvement that I had. When I lived before Alexandria, I was in Arlington. And no, no shame on Arlington, but it felt so incredibly isolating. I had my apartment building. I didn't really know anyone. I could have easily gotten involved. Now I know many of Arlington's Young Democrats, but it wasn't until I moved to Alexandria and just found such an active community, both already in the Alexandria Young Democrats, in the um, Alexandria Democratic Committee, that just made me feel like I could make a difference getting involved on the local level. I started volunteering for poll working during the elections. So, as an elections officer, highly recommended. It's a long day, but it's such a cool experience seeing behind the mechanics of our democracy because it is built by us and run by us. And the chance to reach other young people who are looking for both that sense of community but also the ability to make a difference has been highly rewarding. And so being able to see the work that we've done, the work that we will hopefully continue to do heading into 2026, you know, the sky's the limit in terms of where I think we can go as a Democratic Party, especially here in Virginia. We'll see what 2026 holds.
I love that. That's why I love Alexandria, and I want after I'm done with college and everything, I want to come back here because Alexandria's the place to be at with politics. There's an election every year, and so I love Alexandria so much, and I think that it's so inspiring to see you and other young Democrats, fighting and sort of paving the way for us too. And I encourage all my peers and everyone who's listening to join the Alexandria Young Democrats. Especially if you really want to get involved in politics a little bit more. It's really amazing. You guys have meetings every month?
Yeah, thereabouts. So one thing I will say, just I forgot almost, that experience canvassing. Everyone has their first canvassing experience. I still remember mine was back in 2010 when I was only 15. So it's never too early to start getting comfortable talking to your fellow voters. And I mean, this is the cool thing. It's mostly your community. So talking to people, going door to door in your own neighborhoods, getting a sense of what issues matter to people, and really doing the retail of politics. Saying what matters to the people in your community.
Exactly. And one thing I do see a lot in this school is that I've met Republicans who have said, I don't think that my party's candidate is good. I'm going to vote for the Democratic candidate. And I just love seeing that. It's so inspirational to me because they're really still, especially young teenagers, are really still out here saying, you know what, I'm going to pick my country over my party. And so I just love that. It's very inspirational to me. I had a friend who started canvassing and advocating and doing phone banking for Abigail Spanberger, and he's a Republican. And he said, because I do believe in gun control. He's like, and I know that the candidates on my ticket don't believe in it. But I'm a student, and it's such a big issue for me that I'm going to start canvassing for the candidate that brings gun reform, gun regulation, gun control, whatever. And that was so inspiring to me, and it was so like, wow, it's amazing. And so I thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you for giving us the inside into the local politics and national politics. Is there anything else you want to say before we end this episode?
Just to say that, I mean, those issues that matter to you as a voter, that's really how it all starts. I mean, one of my early memories politically was the Newtown shooting and getting involved, trying to organize petitions. And, it may seem small at this point, but, I remember I recently had the chance to hear from David Hogg, recently had the chance to hear from Congressman Frost, young voices who are at the forefront of these issues and are actively working to make change. So, not everyone's going to be, the next first Gen Z politician, that title's already claimed, but, you can make a difference, and it doesn't matter how old you are.
I appreciate it, Mr. Alex Perez-Reyes. Thank you so much for coming on here.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. This has been Non-Controversial with Darwin Salazar. See you in the next episode.